Hey guys, Josh here. Welcome back to Hell of a Mouth. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast again. Thanks so much if you checked out episode 1. This is a Buffy fan cast. We're going for kind of a fantastic compendium kind of field guide vibe where you can listen to us and we'll fill in some of the details while you're listening to some of the great Buffy rewatch podcasts out there. So today, we're going to cover an article from Collider.com, which came back as the number 1 result in Australia for best big bads in Buffy. So their list is broken up by seasons, not really how I would have done it, but we're going to just quickly go through that now. And I just wanted to say, my intention was for this episode to be much more fully fleshed out, but it's been a hard week for the Buffy fandom. And I'm not going to dwell on this too much because there's a good chance that you already know and you've had a hard enough week yourself thinking about it. But Michelle Trachtenberg, who played Dawn in seasons 5 through 7, passed away early last week. And it hit the whole fandom, including me, a lot harder than I think, well, at least me personally, I could have imagined it would. It's been a tough one. So rest in peace to Michelle, to the Buffy family, the Buffy fandom. I'm here, I'm grieving as well. I'm thinking about you all. And for everyone who knew her and was friends, family, colleagues, and cast members, my thoughts are with you. And with that said, let's move on with today's episode. So I'm going to speed run, meaning go through these really quickly, and then I'm going to share my list of my top 7 bad guys, but I'd also love to know yours. So you can reach out to me. There's lots of contact details in the show notes. I'd love to know your top 7 Buffy big bads. So this is from Collider.com. The link is in the show notes. Let's go. The Initiative and Adam at 7. Having them together, I guess, makes sense because the head of the Initiative, who was the evil element of that organization, created Adam for nefarious reasons. Adam, a very intimidating character in terms of intellect, strategy, and physical capability. He just hardly did anything. Until the very end of the season, we'd hardly seen any of his capabilities, these rumored optimized capabilities, the ultimate killing machine, the ultimate strategist, smarter, faster, stronger, more weaponized. We saw none of that. We saw a lot of talking and a lot of monologies, but not a whole lot of action from Adam, making him quite a banal and forgettable bad guy, even when he had all the makings of a great antagonist. So number 7, I actually agree with the Collider list. Number 6, this is where it gets crazy. The Master from season 1. Okay. There might be better bad guys that had more screen time and did more stuff on the show, but name me a more terrifying antagonist. The one that would haunt people's dreams off that show. I think if you were at all affected by the horror elements of Buffy, it was mainly him. So he can't be at number 6. That is crazy. He was incredible. He was the best part of season 1, maybe besides Anthony Stewart Head's acting, which from day one was incredible. It actually made everyone else look like, maybe besides Sarah Michelle Gellar, look a little bit like, they're playing theatre, and he is the theatre. So the Master can't be at 6. Collider, you're off your head. Number 5, and this is why that Master thing seems even sillier, the Trio and Dark Willow. So Dark Willow had some incredible powers and she was fueled by an emotional rage when no other bad guy had that direct motivation to me of pure, intense fury that Dark Willow had. But that was tempered by the fact that the Trio at times were a little bit silly to me and weren't threatening in the way that an antagonist or a big bad, as the Buffyverse calls it, should be. So having the Trio and Dark Willow above the Master is, once again, as I like to say, and you're going to hear it a lot, ludicrous. Okay, number 4 is one of my personal favorite bad guys. And upon watching the show and rewatching the show many, many times, I like this particular character more every time. And that's the Mayor from season 3, Richard Wilkins. Good old Rich. He is so funny and so threatening in a way that's hard to describe because he's not out there cracking heads or throwing Buffy around like a rag doll or treating his minions with disrespect. In the show, he didn't have the classic markers of a high threat level bad guy, but the fact that he didn't, but everyone around him didn't worship him but respected him the way they did, just implicitly, there was a subtext with the mayor that this guy is not to be messed with because he is smart and he is 5 steps ahead. Also, some of the best humorous dialogue, the more that I watch the show and the more that I'm in stand-up and maybe I'm judging jokes a little bit more than what I ever did growing up, some of the best and funniest dialogue in the show that holds up 20 plus years later is from the mayor. So number 4, probably the appropriate spot for him. If it was a likability list of a bad guy, he might be even higher. But the following bad guys just posed more threat. They had a higher threat level, and that's how I judge a bad guy. So number 3 on Collider's list, the first evil. So I'm going to contextualize this as the Ubervamp, the Turok-Han, and Caleb. 2 bad guys that in different ways kicked Buffy's butt. And the Ubervamp beatdown of Buffy at the construction site is still so hard to watch because he annihilates her. And it was brutal. And one of the best fight scenes, if not the best fight scene on the show in totality, was that particular scene. So if we're looking at the first evil in terms of it haunted Spike, it turned him into a weapon, it had control of this absolute beastly killing machine, and then powered up even another level in terms of maybe raw, just sheer power level to Caleb, which was the vessel, the physical vessel for the first. So the first itself, it was hard to get a gauge on that character in terms of threat level, intention, motivation. We're talking about a being that had existed for all of time. So the pace that the first needed things to roll out was maybe not always in line with the narrative of a TV show. Like, for example, why did Caleb just leave Buffy in the school corridor unconscious? When was he actually planning to take her out? Was that the first that was delaying that? And why did the first keep delaying that, letting her go, etc.? But I'm certainly not here to pick holes in the narrative, the people that wrote Buffy. I mean, I love season 7. They're geniuses, and I am not. It's just we never truly found out some of the motivations and the intentions of the first, and it may have just been because the first is playing a game on an infinite timeline. So I loved the Ubervamp, and I thought Caleb could have done with a better haircut in retrospect. That looked a little bit dated, but Nathan Fillion, the dialogue, the vocal inflection, the threat level of walking around with his hands behind his back on occasion, unbelievable. Number 2. So this is the bad guy that I think had the highest threat level. Who was the one that everyone was terrified of and wanted to run away? And that's Glory. Incredibly well acted by Claire Kramer. The complexities with sharing a body with Ben, the sheer power of Glory, the lack of fear when facing Buffy or any other member of the Scoobies like they were insignificant, truly. There's bad guys that feel they're more powerful than Buffy and have an ego. And then there was Glory that just knew it. And that was fascinating to me. It was almost to the character's detriment that she was so unimpressed with the lack of power in the Scooby Gang. And number 1 on Collider's list. Now, it's weird that they put all these together, but it has to be number 1 when they're clumped up like this. Number 1, Spike, Drusilla, and Angelous from season 2. All right. If you're going to have those 3 together, it can't be anything but number 1. 3 of the best characters on the show. Some of the best acting on the show. Angelous was in that chunk of season 2 where he lost his soul, probably the creepiest and most strategically evil character they ever had on the show. He just wanted to mess with Buffy and her emotions and her mental stability and her friends and her family in a way that the other characters didn't, or if they tried to, they weren't effective at. He was nasty. Spike, the most likable bad guy on the show, even when he was at his most evil, there was some likability about him. It may have been just how the character was presented initially. The fact that he kept getting his butt kicked or his plans kept getting foiled, quite often by peripheral characters in the Scooby Gang, that made him more likable. And I think when it comes to pure acting power on screen, Juliet Landau, I think is, maybe other than Anthony Stewart Head and Sarah Michelle Gellar, they're also in the top three. James Masters as well, I should say. I think Juliet Landau occupied Drusilla at a level that no other actress could have done. That made her character so believable, even in her kookiest, wildest, most out there moments, where a lot of other shows, if they tried to play a character that way, that what's going on here? Is she psychic? Is she not? Is she connected to another universe? Is she connected to higher beings? What can she see? Is it just all in her head? All of those questions you have about Drusilla were just so beautifully presented on screen. So they have to be the top three. As an actual trio, the big three, they are number one. That makes complete sense. So before I share my list, guys, of my top 7 big bads in Buffy, if you wanted to let me know your list, or maybe where you think Collider got it wrong, or maybe where I'm about to get it wrong, check out the show notes. You can find my contact details there. Or if you go to TikTok or Instagram, it's at Hell of a Mouth Podcast. In both places, you can send me a DM there. Number 7, the trio and Dark Willow. So I did mention earlier, it's weird that they were combining things together, but I think the relationship between the trio and how Dark Willow became what she was in season 6, those two are connected. Their storylines coalesced into Dark Willow and the end of that season being what she was. So number 7, the trio and Dark Willow. So number 6, Spike and Drew. So we're looking at the evil era of Spike here, where he was actively planning and trying to take out Buffy the Scoobies, where he was focused just on killing the Slayer and nothing else. So mostly season 2 and then sprinkling season 3 and 4. Spike and Drew together, number 6. Their interaction and their humanity, even though they were meant to be undead, soulless, evil creatures, made for a fascinating dynamic on screen. And also just their sheer acting ability of those two actors carries some parts and some scenes, particularly in season 2, out of teen drama and into a world which is real. So Spike and Drew, number 6. Number 5. Now, I've only bumped this character up one spot, but I think top 5 means a lot more than anything outside the top 5. The Master from season 1. If you think about the most terrifying image in Buffy, you'd be hard-pressed for it not to be a scene featuring the Master. His voice, his dialogue, his threat level, even though he wasn't doing much. Like some bad guys like Adam have a high threat level, supposedly. They're the big bad, they're terrifying, they're more powerful, they're smarter, they're faster, they're everything. But they don't do very much with that in the story. Whereas the Master, he just had an intimidation factor that was off the charts in season 1. And little details like he had outgrown his human features and would never change out of, I guess, vamp mode. I thought that was super interesting about him and just added to his mystique. So number 5, the Master on my list. Number 4, the Mayor. So likable, so funny, kind of evil in a way that the other characters aren't. It's almost like a fun evil, which is a bit hard to explain, and now I say it out loud probably isn't articulated very well, but that's how I would describe him. He was the most fun big bad. Number 3, Angelous. For the aforementioned creep factor, the strategy, and the obsession with breaking Buffy, not just physically, but also emotionally. He was just great on screen, and I might be about to put my foot in it here and have a whole heap of people angry. I think that David played a better bad guy by far than he ever did a good guy during his Buffy run. Obviously, in Angel later on, his character became far, far more complex and interesting as Angel progressed. But in Buffy, I think Boreanaz was a top 3 bad guy. And as far as certain elements of that character, the emotional impact that it had on Buffy that he was evil, I think is without peer across all the seasons. It had an emotional toll on her, not just a physical toll. So number 2, and I think we both had number 2, which is interesting because mostly, and I should say it, I thought Collider's list was kind of wild. Glory. The strongest physical bad guy that we saw, capable of the most damage, but more so than anything, they couldn't find a way to slow her down really at all that was meaningful. They really didn't achieve much in all of their confrontations. And the best thing about Glory, there was multiple confrontations where you saw different parts of her power level on display, and just the sheer distance between her and Buffy, and also her lack of concern. It was almost like Glory had just decided to walk into Buffy's yard and Buffy was a small chihuahua nipping at her heels, more of an irritant than an actual threat to Glory. So number 2 is the perfect spot. So number 1, and I'm not going with the first. We didn't really ever understand the true scope of the first, in my opinion, but my number 1 bad guy was the Ubervamp. And it was for the following reason. All of the capabilities and the whole scale of the threat was on display in every single confrontation. There was no beating on Buffy a little bit and leaving it for later. There was no witty dialogue. There was no Scooby Gang to the rescue element. It was just Buffy versus a primordial force of fury and rage. And those combined scenes and escalation into that final battle between Buffy and the Ubervamp made for the character to hold an outsized place in my mind of which character would Buffy be having nightmares about many, many decades later. And to me, it's the Ubervamp. It felt grounded in that the character was a singular physical entity, but that she was completely outmatched, but also this creature had no other intention but 100% forceful rage. And once again, I love the dialogue in Buffy, but the lack of dialogue and banter. It was just full force. I'm coming at you. Almost like the Terminator. It will not stop. Made the Ubervamp to me the number 1 bad guy on the show in terms of threat level. Okay, guys, this podcast will stop. So thank you so much for listening today. You can find Hell of a Mouth at hellofamouth.com. Hell of a Mouth podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Make sure you let me know your list. You can tell me I'm completely cracked. You can tell me that Collider's completely cracked because I think the way they even constructed their list was pretty weird. I'm not even sure why that was the number 1 result. We might look at a few other lists moving forward in the future from some even bigger websites. Once again, thank you for spending some time with me this week. I know it's been a hard one for the fandom. And my name's Josh, once again, and I'll speak to you again soon. I can't wait. Bye for now.